Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Adelita Grijalva, and this is Plática with Adelita. And we've been doing this little hour every Saturday to talk about issues that are important for our voters and talk about things that are drawing people either to different people that are elected, motivating people to vote in a certain, with a certain ideology, or with that these issues are priorities. So just to give you an idea of what we've done in the last few weeks, we had our very first Plática was Proposition 208, yes on 208. We talked about the next week, we talked with Gabriela Casares Kelly and the United States Postal Service and the importance of that. And we also talked, last week was criminal justice reform and talked about the importance of that. And we had Justin Lloyd, Mike Ortiz, and our soon-to-be county attorney, Laura Conover. And so while we were doing that actual meeting, we started getting these messages about talking about environmental justice and climate justice and how it's important. And so I'm very thankful to the very busy people that have joined me today. And I am not going to introduce each one of them because I think that I'm going to give them an opportunity to talk about why this issue is important to them. But I'm going to give you a little bit of background about me and why it's important to me. So my nana and we live like 3 streets away from a Superfund site. TCE went through all of the water, and my nana it impacted her health dramatically, and it impacted the health of all of her friends in the neighborhood. And what was really interesting is that she'd have these rare growths that were not hereditary. They were not anything that anyone had ever had, and they're very rare, but in her neighborhood, they weren't that rare. So doctors would say, well, people around you are getting it too. And that is how they were able to justify the rates of these really rare cancers in people that live in my nana's neighborhood, right around Sunnyside High School and in that area, Irvington and 12th. So it really has impacted me. I learned about it in high school and was actually a project manager for some of the young people that put all of their murals on the TCE testing sites all over the south side of town. And so I'm glad to talk about this because I think it's a really important issue, but I did want to introduce the people that are here with me. I have Fatima Luna, and Fatima is the mayor's environmental and sustainability advisor. And I'm going to let her introduce herself in a minute. And I have Vanessa Gallego, and she's here, and she's going to, I don't think I should even do titles because I think that you guys can all do that for yourself. So why don't I go ahead and turn it over to Cam? Do you want to go ahead and introduce Cam? We know each other just a little bit. We served on this little tiny board that is, very calm, and nothing ever happens in TUSD. My former colleague on the TUSD governing board and my friend Cam. Cam, can you introduce yourself and just talk about why this is an important issue to you?
Absolutely. Well, for those of you that know me or maybe see me around town, my disability is pretty obvious. I was impacted by herbicides in California. My mom tells a story about how a lot of workers working in the field got real sick after a plane crop duster accidentally dumped its load over a bunch of farm workers. They ended up in the hospital. My mom was in her first trimester with me, and subsequently, I can never say that word. It's being. But anyways, thereafter, my son years later is born with the same heart defect that I have. So this is now passed down through hereditary issues or whatever the case is, but my son is now having to deal with the same heart issues I have. Thankfully, he's got all 10 fingers and toes. But I grew up really upset, really angry about being disabled, being different, being treated differently. And it wasn't until I met your dad, Adelita, former supervisor, then now Congressman Grijalva, who exposed me to a lot of different things, including a relationship with Dolores Huerta. And Dolores exposed me to the lawsuits that were happening around the country, specifically in the western part of the U.S., around pesticide poisoning, herbicide poisoning. Cesar Chavez was always the hero, mainly because his last fight was trying to fight for kids that were being impacted disproportionately. Then in California, now in Texas and Florida, all over the place, by herbicides and pesticides. Anyways, long story short, I am now. I just celebrated my 20th anniversary with a pacemaker, and I'm only 48 years old. I'm also very involved with environmental issues, not to the extent that some of the ladies that are here with us today, but in a very different way. I'm also employed by the National Park Service, which I'm not representing here today. I'm really representing the issues related to our community that are more about creating awareness, creating the understanding of the need for us to better engage in the outdoors, to take our place at the table when we talk about environmental issues, because in our communities, we just don't talk about them in the same way that our mainstream society does. But Latinos, Latinas, Mexicanos, Chicanas, whatever you want to identify as, we've been recycling for generations. We talk about the butter containers being used as Tupperware. I mean, we talk about tendederos and clothes and hanging our clothes out to dry instead of using dryers. There's a lot of conversations we can have around that, but my main role in the work that I do is exposing people to these kinds of conversations in almost through a recreational avenue, but also to create opportunities for kids to enter into the professional realms dealing with environmental issues. But from all the other stuff that we will get into in a minute, but people living in colonias along the border, on both sides of the border in Mexico, and in Nogales is very much like San Luis, where I grew up, where the colonias were very similar on both sides of the border, and the issues facing those people are the same. So it really comes from a place of anger. It comes from a place of frustration, and that's why I'm involved with the work that we're doing all together.
Well, thank you for being here with us, Cam. I think that we're going to have a good conversation. And the hour is going to go really fast, I have a feeling. Next, I would like Vanessa Gallego to introduce herself. She is the chair of the Commission on Climate, Energy, and Sustainability for the City of Tucson, representing Ward 1, and a board member for BICUS and Bicycle Intercommunity Art and Salvage, and it's a Tucson nonprofit, and you just have a whole list of other things that are all tied to the outdoors and the importance of that. And so can you talk a little bit about why this is what you've chosen to, dedicate some time to, and why this is an important issue for you, climate justice?
Certainly. Adelita, thank you for having me part of this conversation. I want to chime in with my friend Cami that this is kind of growing up, right? That we're connected with the earth. My familia comes from Sonora, Mexico. They're farm workers. They've worked their lands, and we call them milpas. And coming here to the U.S., a lot of my family went into mining. So they went into mining in San Manuel, working for the mines. So with my family, we've always been connected to the earth, one way, shape, or form. And that connection to the earth comes with protecting it as well. So I think from a very young age, it was ingrained in me, not only just working with the land, but also protecting it. And then seeing how my family was affected by working in the mines, like working all their lives in the mines. And like you said, Adelita, some of them have health issues, from their work environment. So it was just those things that called to me. My day job, I do work with recycling, but in my time off, I'm also dedicated to making sure that I'm doing something in my community, and very proud to say that I represent Ward 1, and very proud to say that I'm chair of this commission. That's really important, and I feel that's where we have representation to make change. And then, of course, my second passion is bicycles, and I'm able to do that with BICUS, Bicycle Intercommunity Art and Salvage, where not only do we provide sustainable transportation, really affordable, but we also tap into recycling with bikes that are donated. So if a bike we can't, use or sell, we're going to do something with it, whether it's art, and make something really cool and dope that we were able to give to the community, or at the end of the day, we'll recycle it. So I'm very happy to be here because this is something passionate that I do outside of my work, and it's really all encompassing. So I'm just happy to be on this panel with these great folks.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. I'm really appreciative of all of you. We sort of, this movement really to have this kind of conversation right now was the signing of, and I know that I'm going to let Fatima introduce herself, but she was really a crucial piece of getting this, this policy and implementing this emergency sort of proclamation in the city of Tucson. And so Fatima, can you introduce yourself? And then I'm going to push you a little bit to talk about what the mayor just passed.
Yes. Buenas tardes. Gracias por la invitación. It is an honor to share space with all of you today. Again, my name is Fatima Luna. My pronouns are she, her, and I live in the traditional land of the Tohono O'odham people. And just to share a little bit about myself, I was born and raised in a small town in Zacatecas, Mexico, a town that has a population of 2,500 people. It is like 200 square miles total, so it's really small. It doesn't have a bank. It doesn't have a gas station. It is surrounded by mountains, and my backyard, or my mom's home, is just across the river. So I grew up surrounded by nature. Just being connected to nature, eating from nature, whatever nature had to offer during the season. So that's how my childhood was, going to the river and, just making sure that everything around me is in concert with, what we eat, how we survive, and what we do. So that was my childhood. And then I grew up, when I grew up, I moved to the US when I was 15. To a big city, like 37 times as big as my small town. So it was, a challenge to adapt, but I managed. And then my academic career is in environmental economics and policy, both for my undergrad and graduate degree. But really, going into those fields was a result of me loving, just the environment and wanting to preserve it and wanting to have the tools to do that. So my professional background prior to my current position was in the conservation field, focusing on highlighting like the social ecological benefits of restoration, conservation, looking at the intersectionality of how healthy ecosystems are like really integral to people's culture, economic, and environmental well-being. So in my current role, I am blessed with the opportunity to serve my community and advance environmental sustainability, justice here in Tucson. Tucson is my home. It has been for the last decade. It is the only home that my children know, and I'm very excited to be able to contribute to make it better. And one of the things, just to connect it to, why this is important, this is an important issue for us and our communities. I have a child, he's 3 years old. He has, since he was 2 weeks old, he has respiratory issues. So being able to contribute to improve the health, the air quality in our environment, to me, it's very deeply within, my values and how I see that, we need a future for our children and also for future generations. So that's just a little bit about me. Now, as a community, we are extremely excited that last Wednesday, Mayor and Council approved a climate emergency declaration for the City of Tucson. This effort was led by Mayor Regina Romero and Councilmember Durham, but it's also like a culmination of the work that the youth were asking for. Like, our youth are fighting for, to have a livable future that can only be attained if we act on climate now. So we are incredibly lucky to have a mayor that has always advocated for environmental and climate justice, as well as having those, that support from other council members. So in essence, what a climate emergency declaration is a piece of legislation that is passed by a governing body, in this case, the mayor and council, to formally commit or city or jurisdictions to act on climate and reverse global warming. Currently, there's like over 1,700 cities and jurisdictions around the world who have declared climate emergency. In the U.S., there's about 100. Tucson is the second city in Arizona to do it, so we are very excited. And climate emergency declarations are important for multiple reasons. But the first one is that they really recognize and take serious the risk of climate change, acknowledging that climate change is a crisis and that urgency to take action is needed. There are a mechanism, like I said, to formally commit to fight climate change, and they also serve as tools to set goals to mitigate and adapt to climate change and set frameworks or a framework of how to do it. And really, the language depends on the city. For our city, our climate emergency declaration was very comprehensive. It recognizes the sustainability work that the city has done in the past, but it also acknowledges that Tucson is already experiencing some of the effects of climate change. We are the third fastest warming city in the U.S. August was the hottest month on record, and experts have concluded that would continue. Climate change will continue to increase the frequency and also the intensities of heat waves. So our communities are already experiencing some of the effects, and they could be worsened. Like we've seen the wildfires, droughts, extreme heat, flooding. All of those hazards are very real to our community, and therefore we need to prepare for them. So the climate emergency declaration does that. It also acknowledges that climate change doesn't affect everybody the same. People of color, immigrants, outdoor laborers, indigenous communities, they are all disproportionately affected by climate change. So the declaration focuses on deploying a just and equitable transition to shift to an economy that is not only like ecological sustainable, but also has, equity and a just transition for everyone, centering frontline communities. So there's a lot of goals within the climate emergency declaration. One of the mayor was very intentional in terms of like not being just a symbolic document, but also having strong goals that could lead our city to really mitigate some of the effects of climate change. And the overarching one is carbon neutrality by 2030. There's also like a goal to develop and implement a climate action plan that is, for 10 years. And there's also some, shorter term goals like updating our greenhouse gas emissions inventories. But I'm going to stop right there. I know there might be like some questions. There's a lot. We're just very excited that this has been approved, and we're very lucky that we have that leadership to push it, and not everybody has it. So we're blessed to be living in this city with such an amazing leadership.
Yeah, and I think that what's going to be important is how we work together, how what we're doing with the county and the city and the state, and how we can do those things in cooperation and complement, as opposed to it being competitive. Because I think ultimately, if we can figure out a way for all of our organizations that are working towards this goal, if we can figure out a way to do it together, it's not about getting credit. It's about making sure that our community is better for the generations, for us, for our babies, and the generations that are coming. So I think that that's going to be really critical. Did either, Vanessa, did you want to add anything to what Fatima just talked about?
Yeah, I just, for my part, and I don't speak for the rest of the commissioners, but I'm pretty sure we're all super excited because this is what allows for communication to go forward. And we're just super excited. I'm super excited because, like Fatima said, representation, equity is so important when it comes to environmental justice and issues. So just want to say congrats, and we're super excited to be able to work together. And like you said, Adelita, like this doesn't happen in a silo. Pima County has this great climate plan already, sustainability plan that our commission has been looking at, and I think it's just, this is the point, right, where we start making things happen. So it's an exciting time. And like Fatima said, we're lucky to have that leadership to make it easier. So.
Yeah, we actually just had a question from Ricardo, who asked, what can be done proactively from an individual standpoint to help climate control in Tucson? Jump in, whoever wants to take it.
There's a lot of things that we can do individually. Anything from some of them are harder than others. We know that agriculture is a big big contributor of some of the greenhouse emissions. So like eating more greens, or like changing our diet so that our individual footprint is reduced, but also like recycling. Vanessa, can speak to this. Being able to recycle and change the way we see, even before we get to recycle, the way we consume. We can, create co-ops of exchanging clothes so that we don't have to depend on raw materials to develop more clothes, and we can make sure that the life of the products that are already being created live to the fullest instead of like, oh, I don't like this shirt, I'm just gonna throw it away. So those are some of the examples that come to mind, but there's a lot of things that we can do. We can plant a tree, support the 2 million trees campaign, make our cities greener and beautiful and healthier, and like help us combat that heat island effect.
Yeah, and Cam, did you want to add something? Because the one thing that I thought of is when we were on the board together, we pushed hard together to make sure that TUSD went solar, that all of our campuses had solar panels, and any that could allow for it. Because I think that what we're hearing from our young people is they want this to change too. So it really does have to start with them. But did you want to add some more, Cam?
Sure, no, absolutely. I think, and to answer the question, I think as individuals, I think it's a responsibility that we have to whatever we do. And it's super simple. It's exponential growth. People say, oh, I don't like talking about politics, or that's too political, this and that. But the fact is that all this stuff is, as Fatima already, very articulately pointed out, this is going to impact all of us. This is going to impact us disproportionately. And I think what as simple as we can do is we can start talking about it in just everyday conversations with people. We can talk about an experience that you had going, to a public lands, or even the municipal park, or even the pocket park in your community. Fatima, you guys got that great project that you guys did with the murals in that culvert where you guys have that wash. I mean, that is beautiful to create art that speaks about the community, but also it unifies the community. But it's a conversation piece that you can talk about. You can include it into everyday conversations. You can talk about recycling in a way that, when I heard Vanessa speak about metal recycling, it opened my eyes to a whole other world of things. Whereas before I saw those places as oh my God, fail. The fact is, you're doing a service to this community, Vanessa, that we need to be doing, and re-wearing our clothes and donating our clothes to people who can use it, that kind of thing. Buying at secondhand stores, little things. But diet is also super important. But it's also important to recognize the factors that are affecting us, from air quality to the food that we consume, to the beverages that we consume. How many people in our community are still drinking soda like crazy, and they're impacting they're impacted to diabetic stuff and to heart disease and obesity.
Cam, don't judge me and throw me out like that.
Hey man,
I'm drinking tea right now, but
yeah, tea's good for you.
I know, right? No, I know. It's so bad. I know. I'm one of those that like don't let my kids drink it, but I'm like, Anyway, right. But I think that what's good is that we've all talked about equity, and it's talked about how climate issues disproportionately affect people of color. Can you talk to some people who don't understand why that's the case? They don't get it. Like if everything's heating up, it affects all of us equally. Why is it an equity issue? Anyone question. Can.
I'll jump in real quick and just, when it's something so simple as comparing the city of Tucson with the city of Phoenix. The city of Phoenix is all about making that city look like something from the East Coast, from their they've got great things happening with the light rail, but seriously, it's adding more to the heat island effect than people realize, and it's not equitable in terms of access to the community. It's kind of like our light rail here in Tucson. It's great, but it only benefits a certain population. And so I think there's other ways. I mean, I think Vanessa can speak to this probably better than I can, but looking at bike routes, looking at providing that equity. The loop is a great start, but I think we need to have more connection to that. There's certain communities that don't have as direct access to it as others, and there's not enough conversation happening around what the benefits are of bicycling or doing that. And it doesn't just have to be in Spanish. They're not, a lot of the folks that are involved with these campaigns just are making efforts, and they're making great strides, but I think more can be done. And I think it goes back to what I said originally. It's about having that conversation at the dinner table, at the taqueria, wherever. You know what I mean? It's about talking about these things that are supposedly so complex and so difficult to understand, and breaking it down so people get it. And a forum like this is good for that.
Yeah, Vanessa, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I do. So I just want to tie in that question earlier on what can be done as an individual. I sit on the Commission of Climate, Energy, and Sustainability, like I said, and I represent Ward 1. And just to chime in on the equity side, right? When we formed this commission, one of the most important things that we found fundamental, and we valued, and we wanted to add to the way we saw the world, the way we were going to envision, was always having equity on the forefront. And just an illustration of what that looks like here in town, and a perfect example with heat islands is Ward 1 and Ward 5, which is the west and south side of town, have the least amount of trees and the most heat island effects. So thank goodness, 1 million trees. But this is where I come into play, because here I come as Ward 1 advocating for these trees in the Ward 1. So that's my role, that I'm able to help. So as an individual, I do recommend that you get involved with your local ward, voice your concern, and actually be part of the conversation. So you might not be able to have time to join our meetings, which is every third Wednesday of the month at 2:30. And there's a link on the boards and commissions page with the City of Tucson, which I can provide to y'all.
Yes,
store
please.
that. But if you don't able to attend our meetings, definitely send your ward your complaints, your issues, or even what you feel is needed, because those are directly funneled to us, and then we're able to advocate for those things. So yes, equity is super important. That's one way that we're able to kind of tackle it, right, on that sense. And then Cami, you talked about bicycling, which is right? So another thing we can do, right, is pick a couple days now that, hopefully it's not as hot, that we're able to maybe utilize that bike to go to the store, to go visit a friend, pick up your pills at Walgreens. I don't know, right? Different ways that you can just choose a bike instead of choosing the vehicle. And at the same time, be able to invite your family to take up those spaces. So another thing you said, Cami, that I'm glad you pointed out, is accessibility to those things. So the south side of town, that's an area that I'm working in with bicycling and in a whole nother form. But yeah, like, we want to advocate for our spaces to be able to have that option, right? To choose my bike. Like, I want to choose my bike, but I want to be able to make it to here safely, and be able to have that accessibility as well. So when we're talking about environmental justice and environmental issues, there's so many things that come into play, anywhere from heat islands to transportation, mobility, and these all things intersect. Like Fatima was saying, like, all these things come into play, and that's where our roles here are, where we're able to help. But yes, that's where I wanted to chime in.
Yeah, no, and actually you segue right into Nicole. Thank you for watching, Nicole. She said, I would also like to add that there are plenty of areas in town that are still pretty inaccessible by mass transit routes, from the central industrial area to the northern foothills. And it is so important because there are jobs in those areas. And so we're reliant. I mean, and I notice it I live in Enchanted Hills on Mission and 36. We have bus routes, but you have to set aside a good hour and a half to get to where you could get in like a 15-minute drive. And so sometimes it's just not practical, but I'm hearing you, Vanessa, when you're talking about, let's pick a day or two where we choose to use a bike versus the car, or choose to use mass transit. We also need to build the infrastructure to make sure that that is accessible, because we don't have any bike lanes in, like, we're going up a pretty major roadway. We don't have any. And so you kind of feel fearful because there isn't any way for me to safely navigate a bike through our neighborhoods. And that's where I noticed the difference from when I grew up, because I grew up right at, I-10 and 6th Avenue. So right in that area, we always had a bunch of kids riding bikes. We had a lot of sidewalks and everyone would just go on the sidewalk. Well, when we didn't continue to upgrade and pay attention to our infrastructure, when it started falling apart, now we don't really have a lot of sidewalks that you can easily navigate. We can't really use the streets. And so I think it's important for us to think about all of those issues and how we as a community, the city, the county, our neighborhoods, have to work together to figure that out. We can't continue to do business as usual by ourselves. And anyone else can chat. Yeah, Fatima, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with what everybody has said. I think equity has to be at the front and center. And part of, realizing or elevating the message of why equity is important when we talk about climate or when we talk about environmental justice is recognizing that, there are systemic inequities that have existed way before we were in this world. So the wealth that some people have is, generational wealth. So we are already starting at a different baseline. Low-income communities, which, low-income communities are communities of color, but specifically low-income communities don't have the same, fundamental resources to cope with climate change or to even, have AC there's a lot of systemic issues that need to be acknowledged. And that's why, having equity front and center and environmental justice is important, because you do highlight, those, pre-existing inequities and what is the best way. That's all what, a just transition is about, like knowing that exists and what is the best way for pre-existing inequities and what is the best way.
It's like a...
Sorry. To ensure that those frontline communities are, part of the discussion and are, have a seat on some of those tables that, are usually for a selective group. So yeah, I agree with what everybody has said. And in terms of being equitable in greening our cities, it is hugely important. Just the other week, I saw a newspaper or an article from the New York Times that talk about how historical redlining is, they look at the maps of historical redlining in different cities and how that is associated with low tree canopy today. And because, at some point in time, investors saw, low-income communities of color as not good investments. So there wasn't an investment there. So right now, those are the communities that have a very low tree canopy, high heat island effects, and all of those issues associated with that. So yes, I agree. When talking about greening our city, there needs to be that taking into account how some of those vulnerable communities that have low tree canopies, which are usually poor communities, need to be front and center.
Cam, did you want to add anything?
So kind of combining the equity with the tree canopy count and and our infrastructure. When I graduated from the U of A, I got a job at the county with your dad, and he was still supervisor, right? And later on, I went on to be supervised by the late great Richard Elias, and I think my hope and prayer is that this program that I'm about to talk about is something that you champion as well. But going also to tie into the earlier question of what can we do individually. Well, one, we can vote. We can vote for people like yourself that are going to be championing these ideals. We see it happening already with Mayor Romero. We see things happening that we wanted and we wish we wanted, and we kept asking ourselves, when is somebody like that going to come around? Well, we're those people. We're those people that are bringing you all to the forefront and getting you a seat at the table. So that is also in line with voting for bonds. When we talk about equity, under your dad and former supervisor Dan Ekstrom, and happy birthday to Dan. Today's his birthday. But Dan and your dad put together an initiative in one of the bond elections for 1997 bond elections, and then again for 2004 for that bond election package. And both of those provided initially $5 million and then $20 million for neighborhood reinvestment funding. I actually was trained by Regina and by Richard as a project manager with the county, and I worked there for 14 years, almost 15 years, and I managed about $9 million in projects. And all those projects went into West and Southwest neighborhoods where we put in lighting, we put in sidewalks, we put in traffic mitigation, we put in pocket parks. We did what the city managers and county managers were not doing, and that was providing equity to our communities. And so most gente are like, well, why am I going to pay, vote for something that's going to raise my taxes? The fact is, if we don't have that tax base, we don't have these programs. And those programs were designed to effectively level the playing field and provide some of the resources that the county and the city provides to nicer neighborhoods, the north and the east and central communities, people that have a political voice. Well, because we don't have a political voice, because we don't vote in the numbers we should, we're not being taken care of. We're not the squeaky wheel. And so getting people elected like yourself and all the other folks that we've talked about, I think those folks are helping us put these policies in place, these funding sources in place, so that we can better improve our communities and provide some equity to our communities, from bike paths to 1 million trees to pocket parks so our kids can be outdoors instead of indoors, where they're, there's all kinds of scientific data that talks about the pollutants inside of our homes, inside of our apartments, that, close our doors because it's hot and the air is recycled over and over. Well, there can't be climate justice if we don't have people in places where they can actually provide us some sort of leadership to make this happen. And I think, from the conversation around transportation to neighborhood reinvestment was $25 million that was prioritized for these neighborhoods. We need those kinds of bonds to pass again. And much like engaging in environmental justice and environmental talk, a lot of that stuff can't happen if we're not voting. And we see it as, oh, that's something for other people to worry about. And we don't involve ourselves because no me gusta la política. But the fact is, if we don't do it, we're not going to benefit from having people like yourself elected.
La política está pasando si te gusta o no te gusta. So it's like it's happening whether you like it or not. So might as well be a part of the solution. But actually, I think it's Nebrian said that made the comment about being counted in the census, to fill out your census and be counted. And that's really critical and important. And Kurt made the comment that in the fight for climate justice, we can't just install solar panels without ending the environmental racism that the fossil fuel industry has been devastating to the minority communities for decades. And I completely, totally agree. Does anyone want to chime in on that? I know there's so many comments. I'm very excited about it. The other is, as a fellow CCS commissioner, this is from Luis Parales that represents Ward 5. I want to thank Adelita, Fatima, Vanessa, and Cam for holding this important and much needed discussion. I'm proud of all of the work happening in the city and the county levels to make our home more sustainable and just for everyone. I echo my fellow commissioner sentiment that this is an exciting time for moving our collective efforts and our collective conversations forward to prioritize the environment. Sure. Which I think is good. But I also think that
we're easy work through education as well, so that's also important.
And I think what you were talking about, Cam, and the importance of being represented, and that does have to do representation and having a seat at the table. If you think about who's been in these positions before, that's the reason why our neighborhoods have been neglected, because you have to have a majority to move anything forward. And I think that when you talked about the bond, what's interesting to me is we don't ever really assess what the current budget looks like and what are the we've always funded those projects, so that's going to be funded. We always think about bonds as these are the extras, but honestly, I think it needs to have a shift in priorities on what is a non-negotiable. Because sometimes I think what we have to do is really look at the opportunities that we have to say, let's reprioritize these budgets, and then look at some of those services that maybe the whole would be interested in supporting with bond money or override. But quite honestly, these issues that are affecting our health, those have to be a priority. And what's been interesting about this pandemic is it really highlighted so many inequities for so many families. And that I think is going to be really critical moving forward. And anyone who'd like to chime in can do that.
No, you're right. I think this pandemic did really just show the cracks, right? Show all these inequities that our community has faced. I think one place that I've seen, you know, some help is, so I don't work at BICAS. I'm a board member, a very proud board member. But our team at BICAS did everything they can to be accessible, because one of the most important things is making sure that our folks had access to their sustainable transportation, whether it's a choice or whether that's the only choice they have. So BICAS did a really great job in making sure they were able to stay open and kind of get their things together, because that's where we saw folks coming in. We saw folks losing their jobs, losing certain privileges like, vehicles and stuff like that. And when you need transportation or you need transportation, right? Where do you go? And then you're limited with resources. So I'm very proud of the organization I'm with, because they're able to address at least that portion of inequities, right? I mean, we can go here and put a line of how many things, but on that side, that's how we're still currently seeing, and we're very thankful that we've gotten grants to be able to subsidize some of these things and to be able to continue to help our community. So I'm really glad that you pointed it out, but it's very evident, at least on our side, of what we're seeing and how it's disproportionately affected people.
Yeah. Cam or Fatima, did you want to add anything? We only have like less than 20 minutes. I knew that the time would go really fast. I know, it just kind of went fast. And I'm sorry I had to check out. I had a teacher that was knocking at the back and the front so loud for a yes on 208, and she wasn't going to leave. And I'm like, hang on a minute. This is what happens when you're live at a headquarters. Things just, she had her kids knocking on the window. I'm like, I'm going to need to address her. She's not going to go anywhere. She's like, I'm here right now. I want that sign. Got it. Okay.
That's a great segue.
We have 15 minutes.
Right. That's a great segue, Adelita. I think, the Prop 208 thing, talk about equity and lack thereof. I think, here's a governor and a whole lot of people who don't want, this to pass. They didn't even want it on the ballot, even after they gathered all those signatures twice, not just once, but twice.
Right.
And here we are, the institution, the powers that be don't want to provide that level of equity, because what happens when people get educated, you have a PhD over here, you have a master's degree, you got a lot of degrees amongst us four, right? The more educated you become, the more aware you become, and the more change you're going to help affect. And so that's one part of it. But the other part of it is you have opportunities, the work that's done at Changemaker, where not only are you teaching kids about the 3 R's, but you're also teaching them about how to be sustainable, how to be, how to have agency and be, advocates for your own community. That stuff's important. And we have, all kinds of different folks in different political offices that don't necessarily care for that to happen. And why is that? We have to wonder, right? But the fact is that the more champions that we get elected to office, the more change is going to happen for our communities. But again, it goes back to us. It starts with us. From earlier, from the conversation around the census, we need to be able to participate in those things, because if we're not at the table, then decisions are being made for us all the time. And that's one thing. But what I would say about education is, the thing that I saw with COVID was the lack of infrastructure in our communities. Not only you as a board member with TUSD, are you seeing the technology being an issue? But our internet access is horrible in Arizona. When we talk about what we get, it's a fraction of what other larger metropolitan areas are getting at our size, and that impacts us environmentally, because when they do put that infrastructure, they're like, okay, we'll go ahead and put it. They're not worrying about burying the cables or what kind of materials they're using. And when you have lead poisoning in virtually 75% of the homes that we live in, you have a whole bunch of other sets of disproportionate health impacts that we're having. When we don't have medical access, Betty Villegas, who's currently sitting in Richard's seat to finish that term out, is talking with me about how the county itself is sometimes challenged with providing equitable access to COVID testing. It's just it's high time that we get equal access and equitable access to the things that other people get. It's 2020, 2021, and we're still talking about only providing access to certain people. And so I think we need to have voice. We need to have people elected to office that represent us. And we also just need to take personal responsibility and vote. If we're not able to vote because we're not U.S. citizens, then become U.S. citizens. Become dual citizens. If you want to remain Mexicano or Centroamericano, whatever country you're from, hold on to your cultura and your language, but get the opportunity to vote so that we can all have the opportunity to put people in place.
Right. And for those of us who are registered and can feel comfortable responding to, getting registered to vote, to responding to the census, to being an advocate, and calling our ward office and calling the mayor's office. For those of us who feel comfortable doing that, we have to do that in order to make sure that we're speaking for the people that can't or don't know the systems on how to do that. I think that that's really important. And especially for the census, I've been a part of 7 or 8 different outreach where, we're all talking in Spanish, talking about what it means, what the resources would be if people just let people know I live in this community. It's important. So we're actually, I can't believe how quick that went. But what is it that is something that, can someone go to help? Like is there any upcoming events, anything that someone can do regarding climate justice, environmental justice that is happening? Vanessa, you mentioned participating in the ward meetings on Wednesdays. What else can we direct people to do or get in contact with? Yes.
So it's every third Wednesday of the month at 2:30, and it's really accessible now to some degree, right? Because it's through Zoom, so you don't have to get on a bus or a car and a bike and meet us at some ward office. But yeah, so it's a little bit more accessible if you have, like Cami said, a steady internet connection. So please join us. Our link is through the boards and commissions page of the City of Tucson. I'll make sure to provide it here. But definitely be involved with your ward office, Ward 1 if you live in Ward 1. Because that's a direct line to your representative right there. And what you say there gets distributed to your representative. So if you're talking about issues that are affecting your neighborhood, your barrio, and something that you feel strong you need to voice, say to your representatives. Because that's forefront right there. And they're able to like I said, give us that feedback where we'll be able to represent. Another way, like I said, right, is and what was mentioned here is be conscious of how you shop, of how you're buying things that might be reusable, can be recycled, and at the end of the day, not end up in a landfill. Other ways that right now with events, there's a lot of things you can do online to educate yourself. Things in person are still not very safe, and I think a lot of organizations are very hesitant to have something in person, right? So another way to definitely start, is, so I've mentioned communication with your representatives. I've mentioned, taking your own responsibility. But there's always ways to educate yourself. And we talked a little bit about recycling, and that's just getting to know your blue bin. I'm a master recycler for the City of Tucson. And what that means is I took time out of my schedule to go and actually learn what it is that it goes in there. And what's sad is that you can learn what goes in there now, and depending on what happens with recycling, it might change tomorrow, and that might be the same thing you recycle. So just always know what you're putting in your bin, because that's the biggest way that you can make an impact locally right now. If you're not recycling properly, you're contaminating our recyclables, and it's costing us millions of dollars. So right then and there, if you don't know how to recycle, look online. If you still don't know how to recycle, hit me up. I'm a master recycler, and if I don't know, I'll find a way to recycle. If not, I'll just be like, when in doubt, throw it out. So, yeah. But I think that's where I wanted to chime in and just talk there.
I know, because we really didn't talk a lot about recycling. There's so many things we can talk about. I knew that this hour was going to go really fast. Fatima, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I think everybody covered it pretty well. Just being active, and as constituents, we do have a voice. We do have choices, and I mentioned it before. We're very lucky. We're blessed to have the leadership that we have, but that's because we put it in place. So it's really us, So like Cam say, everybody mentioned, like, some people might not like, voting, or like don't see it as important. It is important, because that's how we elect the people that are going to represent us, the voices that are going to be, carried to, higher level tables. And that is important. So if you care about the environment, then make sure that you look at, who has those items in their platform, because essentially we all want, a future that is healthy, sustainable, economically, but also like ecologically, so that our children and their children can have that as well. So who is going to provide that? And just getting informed, I think it's and asking for help. Sometimes, I don't know, as Latinos, or maybe just me, I'm like, no, I can figure it out. I can do it. But sometimes, if you don't know, it might be just an easy question. Hey, what do you think about, like these folks in the valley? Like, what have you heard? Or like, where can I find more information? So getting informed, and you don't know how to get that information, ask for help. I think that's important. And of course, like, individual action is important, but also collective action, like getting to know your neighbors, your community, knowing like the initiatives that are already in place, and you can basically, join and instead of like reinventing the wheel, like, just supporting those existing efforts. I think that's also important.
I agree. Cam, did you want to add anything?
I would say that probably one of the easiest things that you can go and do and help to change, how we're seen in this community. And I'm talking about, underrepresented communities, Latinos, Latinx, whatever terminology you want to use. Also, African American, Indigenous peoples, is, we do a lot of things to celebrate birthdays and celebrate graduations and celebrate this and that. Keep in mind that sometimes you can just go out to some public lands. You can go out to the park. The more we're seen in these special places, the more that we're considered, and the more things are designed around us. So get out there, be represented in those places, and have some fun. And it's also good for your health. Just get out there and have a good time, because again, the more of us, they say that it's easy to get to the top. It's hard to stay there if you don't have a support system. So the more of us that are rising together, the more of us that'll be, representative at those levels. So we got to go. If you want to go fast, go alone. But if you don't want to be there for a while, go together. And so that I would say that, I want to close out with that, is that let's have some good times. Let's go as familias and go and get out there and be safely and recreate responsibly. Take your basura with you and all that. But let's get out there and be seen, because that's so important for all of us, on bikes, on hikes, on all the other good stuff. But thank you, Adelita, for hosting this.
One of the things that happened that I'm really excited about is that we signed the MOU with the city on our last board meeting. Cam and I did it when we were on the board together before, but we had a revised list because there were some schools that were no longer with the district or had been closed, unfortunately. But really looking at the at our elementary schools and all of those with a partnership with the city to open those recreational spaces for our communities. And most of the communities are people that live there. And so we have like CE Rose will now be open. So everyone in the community can go and they can use the bike pass and they can walk around. I think that that's going to be a really good thing. And I'd like to see how much more we can do to expand those services and do this same partnership with other districts, because we do put in a lot of effort and time into these spaces. And then, when the school day's over, we close it up and our people still live in the same neighborhood. So it'd be great to continue to expand that. I thought that was really good and really encourages our young people to get out. That's one of the things that I've seen with my children since the pandemic and school closures is, they're sitting literally in front of a computer for 6 to 6.5 hours with the camera on, and then have 2-3 hours of homework after. It drives me crazy, but we need to allow our babies to get out there and run around.
I would ask that you have more outdoor classrooms, Adelita.
Oh, I know. I would love more outdoor classrooms. Well, I think now we can talk about it, right? Because 117, no one's going outside. Like, because then you deal with a whole other host of health issues, which I think Fatima or Vanessa brought up the number of people that live in our communities that have been essential workers and are out all the time. They're going to have higher cases of cancer and, having to go to the doctor. Those costs are expensive. And so what happens is that we don't go because, you have that little mole. We're just going to look it over. It just grew there. So we're just going to ignore it. And then years later, you realize that it was something that, could have been prevented. So I think that that's important. Kurt wanted to thank us all for having this discussion on climate justice and wants us to continue to have more of these because it's a big subject and we just barely started to scratch the surface, I think. Any last thoughts? I just want to thank you all for taking time on a Saturday to Fatima, Vanessa, and Cam. It was nice to, even if it's virtual, it was nice to see your faces without like a mask and stuff. It's nice. I do want to remind everyone that here at the headquarters, the Grijalva headquarters, 1321 West St. Mary's, we do have no contact lit drops, which means you just come, drive up, we run out, we take everything to you with the mask. Everything is as safe as possible. We can put in your trunk for you. If that's not something you feel comfortable doing, we have signs. You can take some of these. We have Yes on 208, all of these great candidates that are working out of this headquarters. You can take signs and help them by putting them all up. And then, remember where they are so you can collect them when we need to. So we recycle them. We should really come up with really great ideas on how to recycle campaigns until we don't have them as an option, because there's some cities that don't, but that's a whole other conversation.
Bring them to Vanessa's, metal recycling, business, at least the rebar.
We really have to do something because you can't recycle. It's very difficult, those signs. But I just want to thank you all so much for your time. We'll be here at the headquarters from 12 to 6, Monday through Friday, and on Saturdays from 8 to 12. Please come by. And then for Vanessa, Fatima, or Cam, if there's any websites or links that you wanted to add, please do. And then we'll make sure that we'll also add them to the YouTube and put them here in the runner so people can get in contact with you. Thank you all so much for your time and stay safe. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Adelita. Bye, ladies.
Thank you.